I have Dr. Bruce Feldman, and we're talking about the new science of living longer.
Not
Dr.
longer
Bruce.
necessarily, just better, better and
So
longer.
we're already off to a good start because better is always better than just longer. It's not about the amount of time, but what you do with that time.
Correct.
There's a there's a reason why not every movie is 3 hours long. There's a reason why not every movie is The Godfather. Okay, because The Godfather was quality, but it was long and it was really good. Most movies aren't like that. We want to turn your story into a story where you feel your best, you're living your best, pain, performance, and making sure that the prevention of injuries and different ailments that keep you in dis-ease are staying away from you for as long as possible. And Dr. Bruce is the man that I have the privilege of speaking to today. Dr. Bruce, tell us a little bit about yourself so that we can jump in.
So, actually, before I do that, I want to say that I'm happy to be here because I think that one of the underserved sections of the longevity space, frankly, is what you do, which is, and I had this conversation with somebody literally yesterday, was discussing the notion that everyone has some injury or issue over their lifetime. And those things get sort of ingrained into their system. And those things then drive some sort of compensation. Now, that can be physical, that can be mental, that can be emotional, that can be all kinds of different stuff, right? Biologically as well. But you work in the kinesthetic sphere. And if you have a
Mhm.
sided difference, then you make, because the human condition is one of resilience and the drive to continue, right? We make compensations, and then as a consequence, those compensations may not. They may work in the short term, but they may have consequences in the long term that are really not very helpful. That analogy runs across many spheres of our existence. I like to say there are no metaphors. It is what it is. So, if you're damaging something to protect something else, if you don't fix that something else, eventually it's going to catch up to you. And one of my favorite sayings is attitude trumps biology until it doesn't. And from a physical standpoint, it's the same thing. I can get through this. I can do that. I'm not worried about that. I'm just going to keep going. Right. And you can, because the human body and the human condition has such resourcefulness and redundancy that you can get away with stuff for a really long time until you can't. And when you can't, you are screwed.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that preamble,
I'm excited. I'm getting riled
which
up.
is
I was
which
talking
is
to
about, that's
I
supposed to
wanted to
be
tell
about
you,
you. That's not supposed to be about me.
and that's where I'm going with this. I want this to be more about you. And before that, I just want to share with you because what you were talking about there about this humans this spirit to continue and to just get it done, this resilience that humans have. I was talking to a client about neuropsychoimmunology. It's a
Yeah,
growing
cool.
field.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to touch on some parts of that. I'm sure we will as we get into this conversation. But I just want to say before you even got to this level of understanding insofar as what it takes to not just live longer but better, how did you get here? Where was Dr. Bruce years
It's a
ago? How did
long
you
and
start?
circuitous route.
Okay. All right. We have time.
So just the quick version of my life story. Born in the Bronx, grew up in Rockland County, uh, went to school in Philly, did a couple of years of lab work in Pittsburgh, went back to school in Philly, went to train in Baltimore, went into practice in Gloucester, Massachusetts, did that for 10 years, came back to New York to be assistant chairman of medicine at Beth Israel, which only lasted for a minute because they fired a whole bunch of people because they were out of money. So 25 years ago, I knew Beth Israel was closing. Okay.
Oh man.
It took 25 years for them to close it. And then I went it back into sort of medical director land. And then about 15 years ago almost, I decided to go back into the delivery of personal care. I had been a primary care guy. I had done all sorts of medical director stuff. I developed programs for hundreds of thousands of people. I did everything in the healthcare delivery space. And I was all grounded in insurance based stuff, population management, all those kinds of things, where it's about trying to deliver the best value from a dollar perspective for the most number of people, which really seemed like a really good idea at the time until you recognize that the structure and the structure of the system does not lend itself adequately to managing chronic care within those settings. And now, in the last, I'll call it 30 years, especially, certainly more in the last 20, and it's getting worse all the time. The focus of care is on chronic disease management. So think about that for a second. If you go to college and, what's the best degree that you can get? Well, it's in America, it's the MBA. Well, the MBA is the Masters of Business Administration. It's running somebody else's business, right? It's not developing a business. It's not, growing stuff. It's like taking whatever's there and sort of, marshaling it along. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can try to make it better, but you're not making anything new. You're not really developing stuff on your own, so to speak. Healthcare has become kind of the same thing, right? You have this system, and yeah, you can try to make it better, but it's the system. And you work within the system. And guess what? The system doesn't work very well. So the individual components don't work very well. But let's just manage it as best we can. Right? Well, that always bothered me, especially when you start to reflect on the fact that the structure in the system is inherently against the individual. And now when you start to reflect on and you start to look at stuff like genetics, for example, and you start to look at the different phenotypes, how people show up in the world, right? And you measure lots and lots of blood work, different biomarkers and whatever else. Understand that the biomarkers, normal by definition, is a legal term, not a medical term.
Legal term.
Normal is determined by statute. So CLIA and lab tests, they have to respond to external regulations. Those regulations say that the normal is the 90% of the people in the middle. So there's 5% high and there's 5% low. Well, when I was at the VA hospital, normal cholesterol went up to 312 because that was the population being measured. Now, does that mean that 311 is just dandy? I don't think so. Okay. So normal is defined by the population, number one, and it speaks not at all to what's optimal. Okay. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that you measure a gazillion things, and the chances that you as an individual are going to be quote unquote abnormal for something is relatively high. Okay. Now, Fortunately, again, we come back to the resilience and the redundancy and all that sort of stuff. One thing that's a little out of the realm of normal doesn't necessarily get you in trouble. But now, if you start to get a
Right.
few of those things, or if it just happens that the thing that you're outside the norm for is the thing that gets you in trouble, the system's not designed to take care of that unless, right, it's one of these major categories. But when you start to aggregate, well, this is a little high and this is a little low and this is a little high, and you start to tie all these things together, they create a clinical picture where, well, so here, the first guy whose life I saved when I went back into this particular practice model was like 12 years ago.
Okay.
He was a 64-year-old man who was going to do his first triathlon.
Oh.
And he had gone to the cardiologist and he had his stress test and it was fine. Now, why do you have a stress test? Because every time he gets in the water, he gets anxious, nervous, he's short of breath, he doesn't feel good, and it works through it, but he never really quite clears that. So he does a stress test. Now, oddly enough, he's doing a triathlon. He's pretty athletically inclined, right? I mean, the guy can run, he can bike, he's having trouble swimming. Oh, stress test is fine. Well, that's not a shock, right? He stresses himself every day.
Yeah, put him on a treadmill. He'll do just fine.
Now, it turns out that people don't know this, but if you look at the numbers broadly, something like 86% of the people who go on to have a heart attack will be missed by their stress test. It's kind of a big number.
That's a huge number.
That's because only about 14% of the people have narrowings that are significant enough at the time of the stress test to show the abnormality. Most heart attacks occur because of clot formation, which is not present unless there's a stimulus to generate that clot. So you can have narrowing that is either not narrow enough to show up, or you've developed collaterals because, like in this case, this guy has been exercising, so he's got other areas of flow that can go around. But when we did my heart test, which is a sort of a fancy EKG thing, and it measures not anatomy anymore, but physiology. Physiology is really telling you what your heart is doing and how it's working and all that sort of stuff. It showed up. It was crappy. So we sent him back to the cardiologist. He's got another stress test. I said, that's a revenue opportunity because he can charge for that. So he got that. And I said, don't leave until he schedules you for an angiogram because you need an angiogram. He got his angiogram. He got his stent. And he did his triathlon a month later.
There you go. I mean, that's the testing issue. It's just like, what are you testing for? And this person that you're testing, how do they fit into this test? And that's something I think about all the time.
So that sort of goes back to our earlier point, right? There are, take let me finish because this guy had like 5 different things that were all normal, but they were all high normal.
High normal.
Right? When you aggregate them, you're like, this is not a very good picture, right? So, for example, sugar, right? Blood sugar, the difference between, so normal typically runs either 65 or 70 at the low end and like 99 at the high end. Right? Normal sugar, fasting blood sugar. If your sugar is, let's say, 70 versus the guy who's got a sugar of 99, again, this is fasting blood sugar. The guy with a 70 has a 40% lower chance of having a heart attack than the guy who's 99.
Wow. Yeah. The lesson there is that the range isn't the green light. It's not as simple as green light, red light. It's more like a spectrum. That's what the range really means.
Everything is a spectrum. right?
Couldn't
And
agree more.
and then there are all of these spectra that need to be aligned. Like when we met last, right? We were talking about how all of these things interact.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what you have to do, right? This is systems biology. When you
Mhm.
go to the doctor these days, they're not really looking at systems, they're looking at system, right? My heart or cardiovascular system, right? Your cognitive system. Well, I mean, people have probably heard, right? There's the gut brain connection. Well, if you're looking at the brain and you're not looking at the gut, then you're missing something.
Yeah, you're missing out like at least 50% of it. And that's the thing that's what drew me to you, Dr. Bruce. It's your idea of systems thinking. Because at the end of the day, I mean, just think about it. When it's rainy outside, some people are sensitive to the weather. When it's rainy outside, people tend to be not as happy as when it's sunny outside. And that's something super external. It's one variable that's been changed on the outside of them, and it's affected all of these internal variables, how happy they're feeling, how likely they are to do things like go to the gym or be out at the park. And so all of these all of these factors can make really big changes, and you could think that they're completely unrelated.
So here's a little tidbit for you. So everybody knows what chlorophyll is, right? It's the stuff that makes trees green. It's how plants absorb energy from the sun and convert it into stored energy, right? They grow leaves and stuff. Did you know everybody's heard of hemoglobin? They may not know what hemoglobin is, but hemoglobin is the stuff that makes your blood red.
Mhm.
Turns out that chlorophyll and hemoglobin have the same basic chemical structure. They only differ in that there's magnesium inside of the middle of chlorophyll and there's iron inside the middle of hemoglobin. When the sun hits chlorophyll, chlorophyll is able to absorb those photons and create essentially energy.
Mhm.
Takes Converts the light energy into biological energy. How much of a logical stretch is it to think that if we are being hit by photons from the sun,
Mhm.
that we are absorbing that energy in some fashion? Who's heard, let me go outside and get recharged? I need a little sun.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're a
completely
battery.
logical.
You are a battery. Again, no metaphors. It's all right there in front of you, right? Nobody's making this stuff up. They've said it for years. It's right there in front of you. So, all this red light stuff,
Yeah.
and, does that help? Well, yeah. Now, the nuances of all the red light stuff, how big a space, how intense the light, what are the frequencies, all of those things matter where you're applying it. It's very complicated. Okay. You can buy all this crap. It's got little red lights on it, and yeah, if you sit under it for like 270 days, 12 hours a day, maybe you'll see an impact. But then you could buy like the real thing and 20 minutes and it has a real impact, right? But, being able to differentiate the garbage from the reality or the benefiting, technology, that's really a key point. But anyway, I thought that since you were talking rain and sun,
Yeah, you're literally a battery. You're
you
literally a
are,
battery. I
yeah,
like that. I'm gonna change my name there to double A, which those are my initials, so that
there you
that would
go,
work
man.
perfectly.
There you go. There you
Um, so when did you decide that? Obviously, I know you were frustrated with the state of the healthcare system. But when did you decide to start thinking in the systems way of thinking? Like, do they teach that in med school, or is
I
that
don't know.
something that?
I've been out of med school a really long time. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm almost 40 years out of medical school. Um, so the one thing they tell you right off the bat, we're sorry to say this, you're going to learn a lot of stuff here. I can tell you right now, about half of what you learn here will be wrong, and we can't tell you which half.
I
So,
kind of like that. I kind of like that because it's putting the onus on the professional to figure out what's right and what's wrong.
and to keep learning because it's always changing, right?
There you go.
Um,
Yeah,
you know. Um,
perfect.
so, what did you? What I lost? What did you ask me?
So I was asking when you first
Oh yeah,
went
yeah, the
into this
system thing.
mindset of systems thinking.
So when I went into my individual practice, my idea was to just do a regular sort of concierge style practice. It was just going to be, somewhat more advanced cardiovascular testing, and coming to your house, and which I still do. And Zoom wasn't a thing then. Um, and just make it more accessible, and a little bit more sophisticated testing, but it was not a functional medicine orientation.
Mhm.
I had a guy who was over 100 pounds overweight, who looked like he was going to explode when I first started taking care of him. And he was on like 13 different medicines and all kinds of stuff, and his numbers were horrible. So I ran him through the usual tests that I was doing, um, that had real value. I mean, there was stuff that I was doing that other people weren't really doing. But if you went to like highly respected advanced programs, you would find all of these things, but they weren't out there. You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
wasn't. It
Mhm.
wasn't like fringe stuff or anything.
Yeah.
Um, Within 6 weeks, I had all his numbers great. He'd lost like 35 pounds. I mean, it was like crazy, right? He was doing fantastic, except, and I'm going to use a little profanity, Doc,
Go
if
for it.
all my numbers are so great, why do I still feel like shit? At that point, I had the option, right? I was like, well, I could do what every regular doctor would do. Give it time, it'll come around, you'll be okay. Or try to figure out what the hell was going on. Now, on some level, we kind of knew what was going on, but could I fix it? And how do I fix it? And what do we do to leverage these different things? And he's got a really stressful job, and he doesn't
Okay.
handle it particularly well. And he's got
Mm.
some, other toxicity, heavy metals, and fungus, and a whole bunch of stuff that's not routinely tested for. And then there's a whole energetic sphere. So with that guy, I was pushed into figure it out, because the regular approach just doesn't work. And again, because why? We're treating symptoms. We are not looking for root cause. And to look at root cause, is really, it just makes the most sense. I will tell you that very, 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 very early on in my training, I don't know if anybody actually ever told me this. I can't remember anyone telling me this. But I came to the conclusion, and this is really apparent in like the intensive care unit,
Mhm.
you can't fix anybody for the most part. Yeah, there are surgical procedures or that kinds of stuff. You can reroute some things, and in acute scenarios, yeah, maybe. But in like real disease cases, it's not up to you. The body has to, the human condition, that individual has to decide whether it's subconscious or not. It could be consciously just sort of letting go, but you don't necessarily have control, but that will we talked about earlier, right? Um, that body has to decide it's not done. That body has to decide it's going to get better. And all you can do is support the system such that it doesn't start falling off a cliff. And then after a time, it'll figure it out and it'll get better. A great example is like somebody who has a bone marrow transplant. A bone marrow transplant, you basically nuke the hell out of the bone marrow.
Oh,
So it's basically non existent. And then
okay.
you transplant somebody else's bone marrow into that. But it takes
Mm.
28 days, plus or minus two, before that happens. Well, in those 26 plus days, the shit will hit the fan probably more than once. And you're being at death's door many times in that period the risks of that are quite substantial. And then at 28 days, give or take, suddenly the world is a whole new place and everything's fine. Like a switch gets flipped. But meanwhile, in those preceding days, the doctor, all they're doing is essentially keeping you alive and hoping that we can keep you going until such time as the body decides it's ready to go.
The most valuable assist on earth.
All you can do is, it's really easy to screw it up.
I can
Okay.
imagine.
It's really easy to screw stuff up. Okay. Especially as things get more and more complicated. It's very easy. People don't realize the complexity that underlies everything, right? Everything is interconnected. So you do this thing over here, it goes over there, and you didn't expect that. And again, this is where the vagaries of the individual come in. And their DNA is, this guy has this thing goes too fast and this thing goes too slow. And if you don't know that, then I was talking to a guy this morning. He's on a drug that he's on two drugs that have substantial pharmacogenetic variation in his body from what would be expected. Now, they dose adjust, they pay attention, you can guess at some of this stuff. But if you're not paying attention and you do the regular thing and you let it run because they're very well tolerated, nobody ever has a problem, guess what? He's going to have a problem.
Mm. He
So
can't
now
tolerate. You can't tolerate that amount of medicine.
what'll happen is, so his drug hangs around in his body too long, right? And if he's getting a standard dose, within a week, he's at double that dose in the body.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the problem with these prescriptions. And I don't necessarily mean, I mean, we're talking about medicine, but that's the problem with prescriptions that have anything to do with a dynamic system, an interconnected system like the human body, because what's
So,
going to work for you is not going to work for me.
so understand, pharmaceuticals are specifically designed to be selective toxins. They block a specific pathway. The hubris of the American medical system, the pharmaceutical industry, is that we have figured out the blockage is singular. It only works here. Pardon me, I call bullshit. There is no single place where almost anything exists within the human body. There are all kinds of different ways stuff is happening.
So by a single place, just so you can clarify, do you mean like the mechanism that the medicine is working on to help the outcome that they're looking to put
Well,
forth?
so if you look at um, take an NSAID, right? So Motrin, Advil, Aleve, those things, right?
Hmm.
They are anti-inflammatory. Well, that's great, except that it has the ones I named, all have some measure of impact on kidney function.
Mm.
If you have a somewhat decreased kidney function, their effects are worse. So you can have significant kidney problems while you're trying to fix your joints. Okay. Now, what else happens? Well, for example, if you're taking NSAIDs and you have a cardiac condition and you're supposed to be taking an aspirin,
Mm-hmm.
and you decide you're not taking the aspirin anymore because you're taking the NSAID because that's going to risk irritating your stomach too much. So here again, you've got all these other
Another
side
system.
effects, right?
Yeah.
Well, those anti-inflammatories only have a finite period of platelet protection because a aspirin is an antiplatelet agent. It's supposed to keep you from clotting, and things like Advil and Aleve have similar properties, but they don't work exactly the same way. So one aspirin might have an impact for as much as 10 days, whereas your Aleve only has an impact for maybe 12 hours at the most. And
Mm.
it's not going to be as complete. So, as a consequence, if you start switching that around, you can actually increase your heart attack risk by over 40%.
There you go. And so
So,
speaking
I
of
mean,
heart attack,
there's a million of them.
that's the thing. And when you look at like people living longer, obviously there are problems that are keeping people from getting to the way they want to live, how they want to live into older age. What do you find are the main problems that are keeping people from living their best lives?
So, I guess the real question is, what do you consider your best life, right? So everybody's got a different view on that. Number one,
Mm, mm,
um, some of the essentially every system in your body degrades over time. Um, the sort of classic example is kidney function, the individual breakdown of your kidney is it's called the glomerulus, and
mm,
there's a gazillion of them, and it's all about having enough filtration so that the blood goes into the kidney, it goes through the glomeruli, it gets filtered, and then you filter stuff out, you put some stuff back in, and you pee out the rest, right? When you're a kid, you got a gazillion of them. You've got lots and lots of flow. The filter's really good. Everything goes through, and okay.
to be a kid again.
Yeah, exactly. Now, at your age, you start nicking off some of these glomeruli. So instead of having 100 million, now you got 50 million, or you got 70, 17 million, or you got a million, right?
My glomeruli. That's a tough word to say.
It is very sad. It's the death of the glomerulus. Anyway, um, you can plot the decline over as a linear function over time, and everybody's got a different slope, right?
Mm, mm,
But they're all on a decline. So you can predict when you're going to have kidney failure essentially by that. Now, with any luck, your kidney failure happens after you're dead, right? That would be the goal,
that would be the best.
right?
Yes.
So not everything works as cleanly as that, right? Your
Mm,
brain doesn't really work like that. Your heart, all of these things do not necessarily have linear kinds of propositions. Now, what's been interesting recently is that there are certain metrics that have been shown. You don't decline in a linear fashion. There are certain step offs, right? So,
ah,
like mid to late 40s, mid to late 60s, there's a step off where
I see.
suddenly this year is way worse than it was last year. Like, what the hell
Mm,
happened? Right
mm,
now, and it varies a little bit, but when you look at a population, that's kind of how it works. So, what is that about? Nobody actually understands the step offs, but what they do understand is that each system is losing a little bit of its vitality all the time. So, there's a phenomenon called syncope in the elderly. Syncope is you pass out. The elderly part people get already. I don't have to
mm.
explain that one. Syncope in the elderly is essentially a diagnosis almost of oftentimes of exclusion. There are cardiac problems, there are blood pressure problems, there are brain function problems, there are balance issues. There's it may be respiratory involved. There's a whole bunch of different things, temperature regulation. I mean, all of these things take a finite period of time. Okay. So let's say it takes you a half a second for your brain to recognize that you're standing up. And it takes a half a second for your blood pressure your blood vessels to squeeze enough so that the blood pressure is enough to send the blood up to your head when you're standing. And your heart takes a half a second for it to pump faster. Right. So, but it actually turns out that as you stand up, if it takes a half a second for this and a half a second for that and a half a second for this and a half a second for that, now it takes 2 seconds, you're already on the floor.
Not good.
Okay. Whereas in normal case, if things are good, it took zero point 0.4 seconds for each of those instead of 0.5 seconds. So are they still within the normal range? Yeah, if you measure each one of those things, it's
Mm,
okay. So when they do these testings, everybody works out okay. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. Meanwhile, the guy's still falling down. So it is a aggregation of these subtle diminutions across a spectrum of stuff that
yeah.
ultimately then leads to this problem. So longevity really is about identifying these declinations where stuff is slowly eating away and trying your best in these different categories to slow those individual processes down. And the idea is to try to figure out which one is the biggest problem and hit those first, or try to do them together. And there's a cascade. Everything in medicine is a cascade. When you cut yourself, right, there's what's called the coagulation cascade. There are 12 different factors involved. And one becomes 10, 10 becomes 100, 100 becomes 10,000, 10,000
Mm,
becomes a million, right? And if you don't have a million, you got no hope of stopping bleeding. Okay. So the cascade is really important. And it's all that interrelationship that always translates to good outcomes and bad outcomes.
yeah. The totality of health metrics measured and managed. Now, what are some of those health metrics that you feel like people should really be paying attention to?
So metrics are not necessarily the end all be all, but metrics can be helpful in guiding, right? So we've had this conversation before. For me, there are four cornerstones of longevity, right? Number one is sleep, because you can do all the other things right. And if you don't sleep, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Thank you
So
for the
my
reminder.
my one of my favorite sayings is, "I'll sleep when I'm dead." Well, congratulations. I'm glad you have a goal. You're going to achieve it. You're
See you at the
well on your
funeral.
way.
Oh man.
So
Yeah.
people say 7 to 9 hours. Yeah, that's all true, right? But how do you measure that? And is it good
Mm,
sleep? I have an Aura Ring. I've had it for almost 5 years. Um,
same.
my sleep scores are quite good.
I
Why?
saw them. I saw them, everybody. It's true.
Because I pay attention to my sleep, right? You have to do stuff to make sure sleep is good. You have to be regular. I got a new sleep mask. It's really a good blackout thing. It was like $8. It was like crazy. Um, and I don't know if I told you the story. I was thinking about getting one of the fancy Mantra Sleep, right?
You told me.
Beautiful. It's supposed to be the ticket, right? It's like $85 or something like that. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
do I really need an $85 sleep mask? Let me look and see, right? So I went to one of these search things. What's the best sleep mask? And they came up with a few things, and I looked at it, and this one's like $8. I'm like, I mean,
There
I
you
can get
go.
10 of these,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I don't need the caterpillar silk. Okay.
So I got so I bought three at a time,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
work great. I mean, they're fabulous. Anyway, and they're 100% blackout. I mean, if you've never actually done the blackout thing, especially when you first go to sleep, you do not fully appreciate how active your visual cortex is
Mm,
without stimuli. So you have a total blackness, no light anywhere, right? And there's all kinds of stuff going on in front of your face. Uh, there's light flashes, there's like movement, there's all kinds of stuff. And it takes a little while before things sort of calm down and like, okay, we're going to bed.
yeah.
So you have to have a pre-sleep routine and all of that. And the Aura Ring tells me like quantity of deep sleep, and Aura is it's pretty clear that no commercially available wearable is 100% accurate with regard to sleep staging, time in bed, arousals, all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
I will tell you that, in my opinion, and I think there are other people who support the notion, the Aura Ring is probably gives you the best sleep data from any commercially available wearable at this point in time. And because I think sleep is the most important thing, that's why I sort of use it. Okay. And I find there's things that you learn. For example, alcohol has a significant effect on your sleep. Even one drink, you can see the difference a lot of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Caffeine later in the day, you can see the difference. Eating later in the evening, not giving yourself enough hours after eating before you go to sleep, you can see the impact on your sleep. Let me talk about that for a second. If you eat late, you're driving, you're putting in a nutritional load that your body now has to handle. One of the things that it'll do, because you're now loading sugar into your bloodstream, is raise your insulin levels, right? In the attempt to keep your sugar in a normal range. And this is true not for just diabetics, it's true for everybody. Your insulin level goes up. If you're going to sleep within a short period of time of eating, and we're talking under an hour and a half after eating, anything more than an hour and a half, you can pretty much get away with. 2 hours is better, 3 hours is really good. But let's say you go to sleep, you're out at a late dinner, you go to bed an hour after you're done eating. Your body now has a high insulin level. Within the
Mm,
first hour of your going to bed, your brain, your body is trying to decide, do I need to make growth hormone? Growth hormone is the end all be all for regeneration. Okay.
the good stuff.
Building, restoring, all of that stuff. That is the primary thing. Well, the body decides on making growth hormone based on how much insulin-like growth factor is floating around the system. Well, insulin-like growth factor looks a lot like insulin. So if your insulin is high, your body thinks that it's got plenty of insulin-like growth factor, so it doesn't make growth hormone. So that night, you've just screwed yourself because that rebuilding process has taken the day off.
Oh no. Okay. Lesson learned. See, this is what I think is so important. When you truly understand the problem behind something, and you're really good at breaking this stuff down, then it's easier to take action on that problem.
Right. Right. I think people
So,
need to understand why the problem exists, right?
yeah, and
Somebody's
so you
telling you
talked
to do
about
something. Somebody's telling you to do something. Who does it, right? I mean, like, oh yeah, I trust you. I'll do
100%.
whatever you tell me. Yeah. No.
It's not like that. It's never actually like that. So, okay, you talked about sleep. What else? What else is important?
Next comes your game, movement. So
Exercise.
movement doesn't, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, right? So
Walks.
literally jumping around, wiggling in your seat counts as activity, right? Now, may not be the ideal thing, but just doing something gets your blood flowing more than sitting at your desk doing nothing, right? Standing is more energy burn. These things do not help with your fitness, but they do help with you burning calories. So it makes it harder for you to get fat. Now, ideally, you need to move 10,000 steps a day. That's all bullshit. That was a Japanese marketing process, right? The studies show that if you don't get somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,400 steps a day, you're going to be screwed. Okay. 2,400 steps is the absolute minimum. If you're not getting that, you can pretty much know you're going to be debilitated if you're not already.
Your muscles won't be happy. That I can tell
Your
you.
body just will deteriorate. I mean, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
That's a disaster. Okay. When you get to about 4,500 steps, you're pretty much holding off, the Grim Reaper, but you're not gaining benefit. If you can get to, there is no clear jump off point beyond about 7,700. So 7,500 steps is a good target for the maximal kind of health benefit. Now, that's like orders of magnitude, because when you get to 10,000 or 12,000, yeah, there's a niggling more benefit, but at that level, you're not seeing, it's a diminishing returns kind of affair. Okay.
Okay.
Now, having said that, elite athletes do have extended life expectancies, aside from like intramural linemen in the NFL, because they have to carry too much weight and that screws everything up. But all right, so 4 minutes of vigorous exercise, which can be in, what are called exercise snacks, run 4 flights of stairs really quick, or even walk quickly up 4 flights of stairs, those kinds of things. Do 30 seconds at a time. That will make a difference. In fact, there's a really good high intensity interval training method where you go as hard as you possibly can for 30 seconds, do a little bit of warm up, go as hard as you can for 30 seconds, take 2 minutes, do almost nothing, because you got to learn how to breathe again. Then do the 30 seconds again at a killer pace. Repeat the rest a third time, and then a fourth time. What is that? What does that happen? What's happening there? 30 seconds, you're running away from the lion. Okay? You hide. You're resting. The lion hasn't found you yet. Oh, shit. here's the lion again. Got to run away again. Okay. So your first time, it's just, cortisol shot, epinephrine, whatever. It gives you the blast, but it's not triggering your system to get better. The second time, it's priming the pump essentially, but it's still not enough because, hey, we got rid of the lion. We're okay. The third time, suddenly the body's like, oh shit, this is going to be a real problem for me. I got to get better at this or I'm not going to be around. So now you've actually gotten the system going to where it knows it has to improve. And the fourth is just a reinforcing of that. Doing that literally twice a week is probably enough to shift things like HRV and VO2 max, which are two really key metrics to, for sort of fitness evaluation. Now,
Yeah, and you have to keep your heart healthy. I mean, you've done a lot of great work with people that have issues, and I'm
yeah,
sure these are one of the things that can help. Can you take us through the third thing that you feel
yeah.
that
Let
needs
me
to be
just
done
say,
now?
by the way, there's a lot of conversation about VO2 max. It's all made up. Okay. VO2
Uh-oh.
max, unless you have 100%, full out exercise, stress test, fully managed, measured, all of that, they are using an algorithm to determine that. And it could just as well be throwing spaghetti against the wall. It is not accurate. Okay. So VO2 max is not something that is real in all of the metrics that are out there. It's just not. Now,
Uh-oh.
heart rate variability is a number that is better. They can actually measure that on the wearables, and that gives you a sense of sort of how well you're doing. Resting heart rate is a good metric, but resting heart rate
Mm.
is sort of looking at how efficient the engine is, not how hard it can go. So it requires different metrics. So the third thing
So,
is nutrition.
so Dr. Bruce, question for you,
Yeah.
and this is maybe one for, and we're doing this live because I think there's so much good information here. You were talking to me about sleep and exercise, and I know you have a few more to share. Would you like to come back for a part two so that we can talk a little bit more about those other
Yeah, for
parts, and
sure.
maybe we get to take a moment to just kind of summarize what you've talked about so far as the tips that people can really take home with them based on how to help them live not just a longer life, but a better life using sleep and movement.
So I gave you the sort of exercise thing. You want to pair that vigorous exercise with, they talk about zone 2 training. And zone 2 training is one of the things that helps build your VO2 max. That's true, but thinking that you know your VO2 max without really measuring it is really the sort of issue. But what you can do is you want to do somewhat extended aerobic activity where you're on the fringe of having challenges talking while you're walking, right? So it's a little bit difficult to complete a full sentence. Now, it turns out that some people are better at that than others. So that a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
especially guys who are really exercise people, have a real hard time staying in zone 2. I know I do. Um, you tend to jump into zone 3, and then you're only getting sort of half the benefit. So you're not getting the anaerobic benefit and you're not getting the aerobic benefit. You're sort of shooting yourself in the foot. So that gets tricky. But you pair, a long walk after dinner, which helps with all kinds of insulin sensitivity and sugar management and all that kind of stuff. It may help your cholesterol besides. That kind of activity paired with, a couple of days a week of that super high intensity thing can be really helpful from an exercise wellness perspective. And then the sleep, there's some basic tenets, right? The easiest way to make sure that you get to sleep is actually wake up in the morning and stick your face in the sun.
There you go.
First morning sun resets your pineal gland. It gets your melatonin cycle proper. It resets your what's called chronotrope, so that your clock is running properly. Um, you can do exercise earlier in the day. If you exercise late in the day, that may screw you up. Depends on who you are. Um,
Hmm.
a warm shower or a sauna in the evening can be very helpful. Why? Because when you get out, your body now starts to cool off, and that cooling off, the body wants to be cool when it goes to bed. So a cool room, right?
Yeah.
You can have all the blankets you want, but you got to have the coolness sort of on your face. That is very helpful. The
And then you also have to have the tact of telling your wife that you're going to sleep in a cold room, and that might be the hardest part.
Well,
That might be
so
the
there are all kinds of things you can get. These cycle. One of my friends has a one of these circulating pads that he puts on his bed that drops the temperature, the surface of the temperature of the bed to 91 or something like that, and that feels chilly, and then that helps him sleep. This That guy's got some issues actually. He's doing all these different things for sleep, and his sleep scores are still in this low 70s. Like,
Oh
dude,
no. Oh no.
we
But
got we
listen,
got some other
solutions.
work to do. But he moved away, so he's not seeing me.
Oh
Um,
no, but the solutions are out there. And Dr. Bruce, before we head out, I just wanted to say that we did get a question. We got a question that somebody wanted answered. It is based on, I'm going to read it out loud for you. It's based on
sure,
some exercise stuff. So, uh, I'm going to weigh in, and then I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think
sure,
because I think it's always helpful to get more perspective. And so the question here is, what exercise can people do without any weights or equipment in a small space to prevent future knee pain? And then part B of that is for back pain. So again, the question is, what exercise can people do without any weights or equipment in a small space to prevent future knee pain and back pain? And I'm going to simplify this, but I'm also going to give the big picture answer. And the big picture answer is, and it's funny because Dr. Bruce and I, we were sitting having some coffee, and he was talking to me about having a podcast called It Depends. And I love that because this answer is going to have the same exact big idea, which is it depends. It really does depend. Um, what I will say is it has to be something that you can do, something that you can tolerate, and something that you can progress. And what I mean by something you can do is it needs to be an exercise that you can currently handle and can potentially do in a pain-free way if that opportunity is open for you. And then it goes back to how often you're going to be doing it. But let's say with the knee does a couple of things. It bends and it straightens and it kind of twists a little bit. As long as you work the bending and the straightening in ranges of motion that feel good for you, and you progress that over time, you're probably going to be okay. And the same exact principles apply to the back. What can you do? How well can you do it? And how often should you be doing it? Answering those questions will help you get really close to preventing knee discomfort and back discomfort if that's in the cards for you. Dr. Bruce, weigh in,
so I mean,
please.
I would say I agree with all that. I think that, for example, if you're careful about how you do them, um, squats are a great exercise. The caveat being, you do not want to go lower than is comfortable. The idea
Mm,
that the more you do, the lower you'll be able to get, and you'll develop your mobility. And the mobility is actually what's probably going to translate into better function overall. From a back perspective, it's all about the core. Um, I've been doing. I don't know. You have to weigh on in this, Ahmed. I've been doing a lot of dead bugs recently.
Dead bugs, okay.
But dead bugs can be very challenging. So I don't know that that's where you want to start.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but basically, building your core is absolutely, vital. If you're doing squats, when you get down to like a serious squat, then you're building all that posterior chain too, if you're doing it correctly. And this is the key, right? And one of the reasons that we like Ahmed is that his job for you is to make sure you're doing it right. I'm a golfer. You can go to the range. You can hit a million golf balls. Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. If you don't know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, simply doing it is more like a waste of time. Ahmed and
yep,
I reviewed my physical state, and we came up with some areas of opportunity to focus because there are imbalances, like we talked about at the beginning. And those imbalances, if not attended to, will just allow you to become worse over time, not better. And you're doing these exercises because you can. Well, the reason you can is you're removing parts that don't work. And then if God forbid something should happen where you actually need that part, you're going to be screwed.
yeah, yep. And this is why we like you too, Dr. Moose. Now, with that being said, I am definitely excited to have a part two because there's so much that we can be talking about. Until then, where can people find you?
Uh, Dr. Bruce at feldmed.com. The
Dr.
website
Bruce
is
has spelled.
feldmed.com is the website. It's getting a refresh in the next probably 2 weeks. It currently looks like an integrative medical practice. In 2 weeks, it's going to look like a precision longevity medicine practice, which is, of course, what I've been
Oh.
doing all this time, but I just never called it that.
And so next time we'll be talking about what exactly that is and everything that we haven't talked about today, which I'm really excited for. So,
Yeah,
Dr. Bruce, thank
I
you.
suspect it won't be everything we haven't talked about because there's lots of things we can talk about.
There are always things to talk about. There are always things to talk
The
about. Thank you so
tagline is
much.
FeldMed Limitless Healing because you can always do better.
You can always do better. And I love that tagline because it's true, regardless of where you are. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.